Lieutenant Barton reporting, sir.
Oh, yes, Barton. Glad to see you. I understand you're here to fly away a Curtiss P40.
That's right, Mr. Collins. Is this the one?
That's it. It's all yours. And it's a fine airplane. I've just been giving it a workout. I suppose you're anxious to go over the instruments and controls and really get acquainted with the P40, huh?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Oh, wait a minute.
Huh?
Aren't we going to use this one? My Curtiss P40?
No, we'll use that plane over there on the jacks.
Well, I never got anywhere on a pair of jacks.
Well, we open on jacks, Barton. The aces turn up later in the final showdown. You see, Lieutenant, with the plane on jacks, you can operate the landing gear and get used to the controls before taking the ship off the ground.
I might as well hook up my parachute and safety belt, I guess, so I'll feel at home.
That's right. It'll help you get familiar with the cockpit. We recommend the use of these shoulder straps. They'll keep you from being thrown against the instrument panel in case of a mishap. We've found that the best way to learn the P40 is to study one system at a time. So let's start in with the fuel system. Here's the fuel selector valve down here at your left.
Yes, sir. I see it's labeled with the capacity for each tank.
Yeah, and when you set it in position, you'll feel a positive click.
Well, Mr. Collins, is there any certain order for drawing fuel from the different tanks?
Yes, there is. For taxi and takeoff, we recommend the fuselage tank because it's higher and the fuel flows with more of a gravity head. Also, as the fuel is used up, the airplane's center of gravity moves forward. This causes the plane to become more stable and makes it a better gun platform. This gauge on the instrument panel shows the amount of fuel in the fuselage tank. Now, of course, if you're flying a plane with the belly tank attached, you should start using that tank as soon as you've climbed a bit. Then, if you get in a fight, you won't waste any fuel. When you pull this release and drop the belly tank from the plane. When the fuselage tank and the belly tank are empty, switch to the rear wing tank. The gauge is on the left side of the cockpit floor.
I see. Then you save the front wing tank until last.
That's right.
Uh-huh. Is there any sort of a signal when your fuel runs low?
Yes. Normal fuel pressure is between 15 and 16 pounds. And when any tank begins to run dry, well, of course, your fuel pressure drops. And a warning light flashes on in time for you to turn to another tank. On the lower left side of the instrument panel is the switch for the electric fuel pump. It's a good idea to keep the fuel pump on all during flight, so you won't forget to turn it on when you need it at high altitude. The cooling system of the P40 is regulated by the cowl flaps, and these flaps should be open whenever you taxi, take off, or climb. In most P40s, the flaps are controlled by a manually operated lever on the right side of the cockpit. But in some of the P40Fs, the cowl flaps are controlled by an electric switch. You put the switch up for automatic operation.
If the automatic feature fails, can I still operate the flaps?
Yes, you can put the toggle switch down and hold it to the left to open the flaps, or down and to the right to close them.
Well, Mr. Collins, of course I know the cowl flaps regulate the temperature of the oil and coolant, but what temperature should I try to maintain?
Normal oil temperature is between 40 and 90 degrees centigrade. Coolant temperature is between 85 and 125 degrees centigrade. So if the coolant reaches 125, a light warns you to open the cowl flaps and cool the engine down. Of course, you never take off with the coolant temperature above 125 degrees. The landing gear and wing flaps of the P40 are raised and lowered by means of hydraulic pressure. This is the flap control right here. To lower the flaps, you push the control handle forward and pull the lower trigger on the control stick. Don't get mixed up and pull the gun trigger by mistake. The flaps should never be lowered when your airspeed is above 140 miles an hour. At higher speeds, you might damage them by trying to put them down. The plane also becomes too nose-heavy.
Are the flaps automatically locked in position?
Not until you move the control back to neutral, like this.
I see. And I suppose the flaps up position is back here.
Yes, Martin, that's right. To raise the flaps, you move the control back and pull the trigger on the stick. The flaps go up pretty fast, so don't try to raise them at slow air speeds when your altitude's below 500 feet. At air speeds less than 110 miles an hour, the plane will mush down if you raise the flaps. So if you overshoot the field, gun the engine and climb back up to 500 feet before you put the flaps up. The landing gear control lever is here on your left. To raise the gear, push this pin forward and lift the handle. But don't do it while the plane's resting on its wheels.
That would be kind of silly, wouldn't it?
Yeah, but one of my fellows did it the other day.
Was he hurt?
No, he got away before I could catch him. But you're all right as long as the plane's on jacks. So go ahead and raise the gear.
How soon after the takeoff should the gear be retracted?
Just as soon as you clear the field. Watch the indicator, and when it shows that the gear is up, check the position by operating the hand pump.
It must be stuck. I can hardly move it.
When the pump is solid, the landing gear is locked in retracted position. Now put the control back in neutral, and that locks the hydraulic fluid in the retracting system. Before you lower the gear, be sure to reduce your airspeed below 175 miles per hour. The hydraulic mechanism is not designed to force the gear down against a higher airspeed. Then push the control handle down. That's it. Now pull the trigger on the stick. That starts the gear down. Before the gear gets all the way down, retard the throttle.
All the way back?
Yep. So the warning horn will blow until the gear is down and locked. Then when the horn stops, the gear is safely down, as shown on the indicator. That's right, Barton. It's always a good idea to check the hand pump. Then lock the system by putting the lever back to neutral. All P40s up to the L model have an emergency hydraulic system. Now to operate the emergency system, unlock the catch at the bottom of the hydraulic hand pump handle. Put the handle on the emergency pump. And open these two red emergency valves. Don't open them now because the main system's on. But if the main system is shot away, you can get the wheels down by operating the emergency pump. Now, you'll have to land without the tail wheel or the flaps because the emergency system operates only the main wheels. The brakes are on a separate system, so they'll be okay. Now, maybe I'd better explain the throttle quadrant. Tighten this knob just enough to keep the controls from creeping.
Are the P40 controls different from any others?
Yes, the operation's a little different. Take the mixture control, for instance. Now, you'll notice that there are several settings. Full rich is for emergency use, if the automatic mixture control should fail. You'll probably never have to use it. Auto-rich is for all high-power operations, takeoff, climb, and combat. Manual is for long-distance economical cruising. Auto-lean is an automatic setting for economical operation at lower power, below 2,300 RPM, and 30 inches of manifold pressure. And idle cutoff, of course, is for use when stopping and starting the engine.
The mixture control is clear enough, but what are these two controls?
Well, they operate the automatic boost control and the two-speed supercharger on the Packard-built Rolls-Royce engine. The boost control automatically provides takeoff power with the throttle full open and the boost control handle up in this position. And at retarded throttle positions, the boost keeps the manifold pressure constant.
When do you turn the boost control off?
The only reason for turning the boost control off, like this, would be if the automatic feature should fail. With the boost control off, don't open the throttle too wide or you'll get too much manifold pressure.
Yes, I know better than to take too much manifold pressure with a low RPM. That would make the engine knock.
That's right, Barton. And engines have been known to blow up when allowed to detonate or knock for only a few seconds. You should always raise the RPM first, then bring up the manifold pressure. And to cut the power down, reverse the procedure.
Okay. I think I understand the operation of the boost control, but what about the two-speed supercharger? When do you switch to the high position?
Move it to high when you reach an altitude of 13,000 feet. But first you retard the throttle slightly. Otherwise, the high supercharger might build up too much manifold pressure. Now, move the supercharger control up fast. That's right. And then open the throttle again to get the desired climbing manifold pressure. All P40s are equipped with Curtiss electric propellers, and you should know how they work. These two switches on the instrument panel operate the propeller. The left switch is a circuit breaker and should always be on. The right switch controls the pitch of the blade. Now, when it's in automatic, you can use the propeller governor lever to select any RPM you want. With the switch in manual, the blades are fully locked, like a fixed-pitch propeller.
Can you change the pitch of the blades?
Sure you can. To increase the RPM, hold the switch down and to the right. To decrease the RPM, hold the switch down and to the left.
What pitch do you use for takeoff?
Always take off in the automatic position with the governor control lever full forward for 3,000 RPM, or emergency military power. The governor will hold the RPM constant at 3,000. Open the throttle to full takeoff power, to the stop with an Allison engine, and past the stop in the case of the Rolls-Royce engine, when the automatic boost control is on. Then, after takeoff, you reduce the power.
About this much?
Yeah. Retard the throttle to approximately 35 inches of manifold pressure. And pull the propeller governor control back to the desired RPM position.
Was the switch still in automatic?
Yes, you leave it in automatic for normal flight, but for long cruising, put it on manual. And lean out the mixture just as you would with a fixed-pitch propeller. Green marks on the tachometer and manifold pressure gauge show the maximum power condition which can be held for continuous operation. Have the mixture at auto-rich for the normal power condition. For long-range cruising, reduce the power below 2,280 RPM and 30 inches of manifold pressure. Auto lean mixture setting may be used at this low power. Well, how about it now, Barton? Are you all set on the propeller?
Yes, I think so. What's next?
Well, suppose we go through the operations of starting the engine. You make the settings as I call them off.
Right.
Mixture at idle cutoff. Throttle 1 inch open. Fuel on fuselage tank. Carburetor air full cold. This prevents possible backfiring into the engine compartment during starting. Battery switch on. Generator switch on. Fuel pump on. 3 right-hand circuit breakers on. Gun switches off. Now check your fuel pressure.
15.5 pounds.
Okay, then prime the engine.
How much do I give it?
1 stroke for a warm engine, 3 if the engine's cold. Then shut off the fuel pump.
Shut it off?
Yeah, to keep from flooding the engine when you move the mixture control forward. All right. Now the next thing would be to turn the ignition to both and engage the starter. But we won't do that while the plane's on jacks. Now, after the engine fires, advance the mixture control to auto rich and the throttle to 1,200 RPM. Then turn the fuel pump back on. If there's no oil pressure within 15 to 30 seconds, stop the engine and investigate the trouble. If the oil pressure's okay, 60 to 80 pounds, warm up the engine at 12 to 1,400 RPM until the oil temperature hits 40. And the press-stone temperature at least 85 degrees centigrade. During cold weather, leave the cowl flaps closed until the engine is warmed up. With the propeller switch on manual, run the engine up to 2,300 RPM and check the magnetos. A drop of more than 100 RPM on a single magneto indicates faulty ignition. If the magnetos are okay, then switch the propeller back to automatic. Release the parking brake and taxi to the runway. The tail wheel is steerable by the rudder pedals, so don't ride the brakes when you taxi. Now, when you get to the runway, and just before you take off, make a final check of everything. Fuel selector valve on the fuselage tank. Fuselage gauge showing plenty of fuel. Fuel pressure 15 to 16 pounds. Oil temperature above 40 degrees. Oil pressure 60 to 80 pounds. Coolant temperature above 85. Right-hand circuit breakers on. Gun switches off. Battery on. Generator on. Propeller on automatic. Propeller circuit breaker on. Mixture on auto rich. Propeller governor in full forward position. Automatic boost on. Supercharger in low speed. Elevator trim tabs at TO, takeoff position. Rudder trim tab at 1.5 marks to the right. Aileron trim tab neutral. Cowl flaps open, and you're all set to go. Over there on the runway is Lloyd Child, chief test pilot for Curtiss Wright. He's going to put that ship through some maneuvers for us. And as he does, I'll try to give you some pointers on handling the P40 in the air. Okay?
I'm all set.
All right. Now, as the plane starts down the runway, open the throttle with a positive, steady motion. That's it. And steer with the brakes at first. Then use the rudder to steer when you get the tail in the air. Engine torque pulls the left wing down, so keep the wings level by holding the stick to the right. Fly the plane off the ground by lowering the tail just a little at the takeoff.
Then you don't take off in a three-point attitude?
No, because that might put the airplane in a stalled condition, which would be bad at your slow speed right after takeoff. You see, engine failure or a gust of wind when you're stalled so close to the ground could be disastrous. Just as soon as you clear the field, retract the landing gear and retard the throttle and propeller controls to normal flying power. Pick up speed as soon as possible and climb at 140 miles an hour. Now, to gain altitude fast, you can climb at full military power for 15 minutes with the Rolls-Royce and 5 minutes with the Allison. These settings are marked with yellow lines on the instrument. The P40 is normal in all flight characteristics, as you'll see when Lloyd goes through his maneuvers. But I've heard that some new pilots tend to over-control because they're not used to the long nose of the liquid-cooled engine ahead of them. Slight changes in the heading of the airplane with respect to the horizon appear to be more than they would with radial engine airplanes. However, after a few minutes of flying, I'm sure you'll be able to do it smoothly and easily without fighting the controls. Stalling speed of the P40 is 82 with the flaps down and 92 with the flaps up. Just before the stall, there's a slight tail buffet to warn the pilot. And the stall, if allowed to continue, throws the plane in a spin that loses 1,000 feet a turn. Now, the P40 will come out of the spin by itself if the pilot lets go of the controls. But to come out in a hurry, cut the throttle, kick the rudder in the opposite direction to the spin, and shove the control stick forward.
Well, I'm glad to know the plane will straighten out by itself. But if I get in a spin, brother, I want to do something about it. Now, let's see now. To come out in a hurry, I cut the throttle, kick the rudder hard in the direction opposite to the spin, and shove the control stick forward.
Okay, Lieutenant. That'll take you out of the spins in a hurry. But when you start flying a pursuit airplane, the main thing you've got to learn is the right way to land it. As Lloyd comes in, I'll point out a few things for you to remember when landing a Curtiss P-40. And the first thing to do is to cut your airspeed to less than 175 miles an hour while you're up around 3,500 feet. Get your landing gear down while you still have plenty of altitude. Last-minute operations and maneuvers are apt to upset your good landing technique. Circle the field at approximately 140 miles an hour to get accustomed to the slower airspeed and to familiarize yourself with the field and get set for the landing.
What items do you check off before landing?
They're all listed on this checkoff card. The first thing to do, though, is open the cabin. In fact, most every old-timer will tell you he can judge airspeed better when he feels the breeze in his face. And it's safer to have the cabin open if you hit a ditch and end up on your back. If you ever happen to end up with the airplane on its back and the cabin closed, you can open the kick-out panel in the left-hand side of the sliding hood by means of this red lever near the longeron. There's another emergency exit you can use during flight. Up here in the top of the cabin roof is a red lever. Simply pull this lever and it'll release the whole cabin. Then you check to make sure the mixture control is on auto rich and the propeller governor control at 2650 automatic setting. It's a good idea to have the propeller set this way for plenty of RPM in case you have to give her the gun and go around again. On the other hand, you should not set it for full 3,000 RPM because it might momentarily over-rev if you open the throttle too fast. Of course, the fuel selector should be on a tank with plenty of gas. The carburetor heat control full forward and the gun switches off. And test the hand pump again just to make sure the landing gear is down before you put the landing gear in neutral. While you're still high up, put your flaps about halfway down, make a wide sweep, and glide toward the runway at 115 miles an hour. Trim the elevator tab so the plane will glide hands off at this speed. Line up with the runway while you're still a mile away. This will prevent last-minute maneuvers which sometimes cause ground loops. New pilots have a tendency to undershoot the field. They cut the throttle and come in short. So remember to keep the throttle slightly open when you first come in for a landing. At 500 feet above the ground, put your flaps full down, cut the throttle to 1/2 inch open, and glide in at 115 miles an hour until you're over the runway. And when you're 10 feet off the ground, cut the throttle and level out for the landing. When all the wheels are down in the three-point attitude, apply the brakes fairly hard, but not hard enough to lock the wheels or raise the tail. Remember, most landing accidents happen after the plane is on the runway. So concentrate on rolling straight until the plane comes to a stop.
I can understand that all right.
Well then, Lieutenant, I guess you've got it.
Is that really all there is to flying a Curtiss P40? It doesn't seem at all complicated now.
Well, there's nothing complicated or difficult about flying this airplane once you understand the things we've carefully gone over. Now, just remember to take it easy. In fact, they tell me a Warhawk, like that one over there, is apt to take off by itself if it's left alone too long.
I get you, sir. I'm practically in the air right now.
On that landing, you look like a veteran.
Oh, thank you, sir. Getting fond of this airplane already.
Okay, Lieutenant. Then you're all set. So long, fella. Lots of luck.
Thanks. Hadn't I better wait for those two P40s to come in?
No, that's just a couple of the boys waiting to give you a send-off. Go on up and join them. With men like these, flying planes like these, there'll always be a flag like this, waving in the breeze.
These are lethal weapons. Their one purpose, the sole reason for their existence, is to knock enemy planes out of the sky. They are P38s, and they rank with the fastest and best fighters in the air today. Now, the fact that this is a two-engine airplane does not mean that it's a difficult airplane to fly. On the other hand, the two engines do give it a wide range of performance and extra margins of safety. Some hangar experts insist that it is impossible to bail out of the 38 because of the twin booms and rudders and because of the horizontal stabilizer span. The truth is that it is no easier or harder to bail out of the 38 than out of any single-seater fighter. Bailouts can be made either, one, by turning the plane on its back and dropping out, or two, by getting out the left window and sliding down the wing. Now, don't stand on the wing to jump. The span of the horizontal stabilizer just doesn't affect the bailout. At high speeds, the airflow carries any object straight back and under the empennage, which is actually higher than the wing. Therefore, the only portion of the empennage which is critical is that portion directly aft of the bailout area. Thus, it doesn't matter whether the empennage has a 20-foot span or a 100-foot span. The critical area is still the same. Furthermore, on the 38, there's no vertical stabilizer which can get in the way. Actually, however, the object isn't to bail out of your ship, but to make the other fellow bail out of his. In the 38, you have a weapon which will help you do just that. It's a fighting man's airplane. Tough, rugged, reliable. Its high-speed performance is well known. But its control at low speeds is equally spectacular from the point of view of performance. Presented herewith is a new type of airplane, a primary trainer escort, under absolute control at 90 miles an hour indicated. Now, watch its acceleration. Most important of all, maximum performance makes it possible for a 38 pilot to dictate when and at what altitude he shall combat. But to achieve that maximum performance, it is first necessary to understand normal and emergency operations. What we're about to see won't give us any laughs or thrills, but in the thick of battle when the going is tough, might mean the difference between victory or defeat, life or death. Among other things, we'll see what to do for normal routine precautions. For single engine flight, landing, and single engine failure on takeoff. How to handle one or both propellers inoperative or so-called running wild. We will check on use of landing gear and flap emergency extension systems. All of these will be seen for the purpose of achieving the true objective of the airplane, maximum performance in combat. And the men best qualified to demonstrate these operations are the men who know the 38 best, the men who have flown them the most, production pilots. Charlie Brannan, Tom Kennedy, Jimmy Mattern, Avery Black. The pilot who's flown more 38s than any other man is going to take it up from here. He's the chief engineering test pilot, Milo Burcham.
We're not going to try to teach you how to fly. You've all had good training in other ships. We're simply going to show you how we handle a 38, hoping to increase your knowledge and skill, and in that way, add to the effectiveness of the ship and to your own safety. There are certain routine precautions which apply to every condition on every flight. So let's take a look at those right off the bat.
Before takeoff, the hatch must always be securely latched. Both sliding windows must also be closed all the way. With the windows closed, the airflow is normal. But if the windows are carelessly left open, the airflow is disturbed and causes the wake to hit the tail. On airplanes equipped with external tanks, it is essential to be able to drop the tanks immediately in case of engine failure on takeoff. Therefore, before starting, the drop tank switch is placed in the safe position and the drop tank selectors are placed on, so that in an emergency we can lose the tanks by simply punching the drop tank release button. When the full fuel load is carried, takeoffs are always on the front tanks. Normally, we use no flaps. Later, we will check on conditions where flaps are used. But at all times, maximum allowable manifold pressure is used. Once in position at the head of the line, and after run-up and mag check, propellers are checked in the automatic position. By trying the governors, we make certain that they're really governing. Booster pumps are switched on in order to ensure adequate fuel pressure in the event of engine fuel pump failure. Brakes are held while both throttles are advanced to get the maximum allowable manifold pressure. In this case, 40 inches. The object is to get those turbos turning so as to obtain takeoff power at the start of the takeoff run. Furthermore, by holding the brakes as long as possible, we allow the propellers to reach the governing limit of 3,000 RPM at the start of the run. In that way, if they're going to run wild, they'll do it while there's still time to stop the ship. Now, without flaps and using 40 inches of manifold pressure, the 38 starts the takeoff run. Because of the tricycle gear, however, there is no tendency on the part of the airplane to fly itself. Therefore, at about 70 miles an hour, we start to ease back on the stick. At 90 to 100 indicated, after a run of 15 to 1,800 feet, we pull back to break ground. At this point, in spite of the lack of a feeling of lightness, the airplane responds immediately and easily. Gear is upped as soon as the ship is committed to flight. By the time the gear retracts, indicated airspeed will be at least 150, well above single engine operation speed of 120. If the boom doors do not close immediately, nosing the plane abruptly down a couple of times usually will close the doors. No flaps are used for normal takeoff because without them, we get the single engine flying speed faster. But if this tower, for instance, were an obstacle 1,700 feet from the head of the runway, a zero flap takeoff would catch it right amidships. With 50% flaps under exactly the same conditions, the airplane easily clears the tower. Airspeed will be at least 140 indicated by the time the gear retracts, which is enough speed to retract the flaps without loss of altitude.
Although flaps reduce takeoff run about 500 feet, they only provide a takeoff goose because the rate of climb and speed at zero flaps quickly exceed the initial advantage with flaps. As soon as the airplane is in its climb, power is reduced to 37 inches of manifold pressure and 2,600 RPM. At this time, if high-altitude flight is not contemplated, booster pumps can be turned off. There's very little difference in the rate of climb at indicated speeds of 140 to 180 because what is gained by the angle increase is lost in speed. The flight characteristics of the 38 are excellent. For example, the stall, which we're about to see, is so slight as to be almost imperceptible to the camera. The power stall will occur at about 70 miles an hour. Loss of altitude will be about 50 feet. The counter-rotating propellers eliminate torque, no tendency of either wing to dip or fall away. Watch closely. There's the stall. Characteristics are just as good in the power-off stall with gear and flaps retracted or extended. Accelerated stalls, accompanied by normal buffeting, occur on any airplane when the angle of attack is increased to the point that the airflow over the wing becomes turbulent. This can happen in sharp turns, pull-outs, or other severe maneuvers. The 38 is designed to take the buffeting of the stall and has no tendency to slip off on either wing at any altitude. If you want to get out of an accelerated stall, permit the airflow to reestablish normal lift by easing up on the stick. For the sake of greater maneuverability, there is a maneuvering stop on the flap control. With flaps in this position, turns are shortened, and similar maneuvers perform with great efficiency. Low-speed banks at low levels, however, even with the flaps full down, are non-habit forming. There's just not going to be enough time to recover lost altitude before the ground catches up with you. And in practicing maneuvers, there are two things that are darn important. First, where inverted flight is concerned, the engines are not designed for inverted flight of more than 10 seconds. Oil pressure will drop in even less time, and the bearings are apt to be damaged. Furthermore, prolonged inverted flight is in itself unnecessary. Secondly, in any maneuver which requires a downward recovery, the pilot must have plenty of air under him, at least 10,000 feet. Due to the 38's acceleration in a dive, the ground comes up awfully fast to slap you in the face. There's a dive limit chart in the cockpit. Be sure to check it. Landings are not complicated, but in night landings, pilots new to the 38 sometimes get a surprise when lowering the landing light. This is due to the fact that the light disturbs the airflow to the aileron. This nibbling feels a bit strange at first, but actually has no unfavorable effect as far as flying is concerned. For the landing itself, propellers are set for 2,600 RPM with about 23 inches of manifold pressure. And to ensure adequate fuel pressure, on go the booster pumps. Gears extended at 175 miles an hour indicated. Flaps at 150. At this time, the toe brake should be pumped to ensure adequate pressure upon landing. Now let's retract the gear again to show that even if the normal extension system fails, there is still no reason to start getting ideas about a belly landing. Two conditions are usually the cause of hydraulic system failure. Either the engine hydraulic pump has gone out, or there's a break in the hydraulic lines. If the engine pump goes out, fluid will still be in the lines, and the auxiliary hand pump can be used to extend both the gear and flaps. No other action except pumping is required, and it will take about 5 minutes to pump the gear down and lock. If, after 2 or 3 minutes of pumping, there is no feeling of pressure against the pump, it indicates that there is fluid failure. In this case, the emergency system is still on tap. The emergency extension system is used in the following sequence. First, landing gear control lever is placed down. Next, the bypass valve is closed by turning it clockwise. Now the hand pump selector valve handle is placed down, and the pump is operated to force the doors open with the wheels. Pumping is continued until all 3 wheels are fully extended and locked. Nosing the ship abruptly up will help force the wheels out. While pumping, the selector valve handle should be checked down to make sure it hasn't moved out of position. Flaps can also be extended by the hand pump. To do this, the flap control handle is placed down. Then the selector valve handle is set to up, and the pump operated till the flaps are extended the desired amount. If for any reason the flaps will not extend, the airplane lands well enough without them. In a zero flap landing, however, allow for float and higher stalling speed. With booster pumps on, the gear down and flaps in 50% position, the approach is made at 120 miles an hour indicated. Speed is reduced to 110. And when the approach is in the bag, the flaps are extended full down. Then, at 110, flare out and come in over the fence at 100 to 105 miles an hour, but never faster than 110. Contact never has to be made at over 100 miles an hour. The 38 lands in the same attitude as ships with conventional gear, on the two main wheels. The nose wheel will settle of its own accord. Don't be tricycle gear conscious. Just be flying level somewhere near the ground. Flying, not falling. And then the less the pilot does, the better. For slowing down, brakes are applied on and off, rather than with a constant pressure. There is only one way possible to make landing the 38 difficult. Try to bring it in on its nose wheel. Nose wheel landings are expensive ways of messing up the landscape. And sometime or other, everybody feels a little sorry for pilots just starting to fly single-seat fighters. But second-hand information doesn't apply anymore to pilots graduating to the 38 because an instruction version is now available as a two-place airplane. The boys call it the piggyback. Now a new pilot can ride in back of the instructor and have any procedure cleared up for him in flight. This is how it works. A couple of weeks ago, a new 38 Army pilot visited the field.
Wrap your legs up, Bill, and make yourself at home. Come on, kid.
This being a passenger is a good deal. I feel like a colonel already.
The last guy thought he was a general.
Well, all kidding aside, Milo, I hope you don't think me a dope if I ask a lot of fool questions.
You know a better way of finding something out?
Well, no, but...
Well, then ask away.
Okay. Well, I did have a couple of question marks about the propellers running wild. Not that I don't understand perfectly, but, well, you know, it just isn't quite clear.
Well, there's nothing serious about propellers running wild.
No?
It usually simply means that they're caught in full high RPM. And as a result, the engines are overspeeding.
This can happen due to a shortened electrical system or the switches being left in manual instead of automatic. Or maybe the circuit breaker switches are out at the start.
But no matter what causes propeller over-revving, retarding the throttles will bring them under control and still leave enough power to at least circle the field and land. Propellers will run wild if, through carelessness, the propeller switches are left in manual instead of being checked in automatic. In this case, RPMs will be reduced by simply throwing the switches where they belong, in automatic. On late versions of the 38, warning lights go on when there's a short in the circuit. If a short occurs, the circuit breakers overheat and jump up. When they do, push the circuit breakers down. They'll have to be held down for about 15 seconds. Otherwise, the heat will just make them jump right back.
I got you. If we don't let them cool off, they'll pop right back up again. Can we simulate this in flight?
When we get in the air, you'll see that holding the circuit breakers down for 15 seconds has disadvantages. But now we're ready for the takeoff check. Propellers in automatic, governing check. Booster pumps on, toe brakes held, throttles advanced to get maximum allowable manifold pressure. The lights warn us that there's a short, and the propellers jump from 3,000 to 3,500 RPM. Shoving down the circuit breakers will help control the propellers. But the 15 seconds that they have to be held down is a long time in flying to have one hand committed to a single action. Therefore, it's better to retard the throttles and bring the RPMs down to 3,000 while still maintaining sufficient power to establish level flight before pushing the circuit breakers down. Now, with flight established, the circuit breakers can be held down. And if they stay down, as much power as is desired can be put on, and the propellers will be governing properly. If one engine were damaged by over-revving, the propeller would be feathered right away, and single-engine flight would be necessary. But correct single-engine flight procedure must be followed. There are only three main steps. The first step will be to set the dead engine mixture control to idle cutoff so as to reduce fire hazard by stopping the flow of fuel at once. Furthermore, if by mistake we try to kill the engine that's operating, the complete loss of power warns us while there's still time to recover. So if the right engine were to quit, the three main steps would be, first, right mixture control to idle cutoff. Second, right feathering switch to full feather. And third, right throttle back to closed. That's all there is to getting set for single-engine flight. If the flight is going to be for any duration, though, there are 5 more simple operations which are mainly precautionary and intended to reduce drag. Turn the right booster pump off, trim the rudder tab, close the right tank selector valve, close the right press tone shutter, and close the right oil cooler flap. Now, that's one of the handy features of the 38. If one engine fails, there's still a mighty fine single-engine ship under us. There's no difference in flight technique with either engine. But for demonstration, we like to fly on the left engine and keep the generator going, rather than use the right engine and run on the battery. What we've just checked over have been the emergency procedures for single-engine failure. But for practicing single-engine operation and maneuvers, slightly different procedures are followed so that, if necessary, the simulated dead engine can be brought back into operation quickly. In the first place, be awfully sure that the live engine is on the tank with the most fuel. Then, and only then, start the procedure for single-engine practice flight. Now, turn the right booster pump off. Then, by retarding the right throttle, single-engine failure and the resultant yaw will be simulated. Recover from yaw with opposite rudder and throw the right mixture control to idle cutoff and feather up. After the engine is stopped, trim the rudder tab and Prepare the right press stone shutter and right oil cooler flap. After the engine is stopped and the ship is trimmed, the control should be set in position for immediate unfeathering just in case something should happen to the engine we're flying on, and we have to use the engine being simulated as dead. So, as soon as the propeller is feathered, set the feathering switch in the normal position. Then, raise the guard on the manual propeller switch to the dead engine and set it to the fixed position, and move the governor control to low RPM. Now, with the feathering switch in normal position, the manual propeller switch to the dead engine in fixed pitch position, and the right governor control in low RPM, we can continue single engine practice flight safely. Unfeathering to resume normal two-engine flight takes only 4 steps. Manual propeller switch is held to increase RPM until 800 is reached, and then throw the switch to the automatic position. Right mixture control is set to water rich. Check to make sure that there is sufficient oil and fuel pressure. Open the throttle slowly, and as the press tone temperature rises, continue advancing it slowly. At 25 inches of manifold pressure, RPMs are also increased until power and propellers on both engines are synchronized. In unfeathering, we have to advance the throttle slowly because the dead engine is cooled off, and sudden application of power would be apt to result in serious backfiring. But no matter if the single-engine flight is due to necessity or for the sake of practice, the procedures for flight and landing will be the same. For single-engine cruising, satisfactory power is 31 inches of mercury and 2,300 RPM. For single-engine climb, 37 inches of mercury and 2,600 RPM are satisfactory. Use of more power is unnecessary and depends on the weight conditions of the plane. At an altitude of 20,000 feet, the 38 on one 1,150 horsepower engine can hit 205 miles an hour indicated airspeed. Figuring pressure and outside air temperature, the true speed is actually about 282 miles an hour. Loss of range in flying on one engine is about 20%. In cases of prolonged single-engine flight, fuel will have to be drawn from the tanks of the dead engine. Now, Bill, you reach over to do this. First, turn the selector to the tank which is to supply fuel. Then set the cross-feed valve switch to cross-feed position and turn the other selector off. The single-engine maneuvers we're about to go through are to show the flexibility of the ship and are recommended only for combat emergency. A single-engine aileron roll is simple enough, but the engine design, as we know, doesn't allow inverted flight of more than 10 seconds due to the loss of oil pressure. The single-engine stall characteristics are at least the equal of most single-engine planes. The power stall occurs at 90 miles indicated, and the recovery is the same as with two engines. Now, here's the stall. There's a big change in directional trim with change in speed comparable to the torque effect in single-engine airplanes. This is more pronounced in the slow-speed range. At high speed, the trim approaches the normal for twin-engine operation. And now, while we're heading back for a landing, there's one important thing to keep in mind. Never count on a two-engine plane maintaining altitude on one engine with both the gear and flaps full down. The landing approach is made at 2,600 RPM with 20 inches of manifold pressure. At about 160, gear is let down. Tab control will be set at 0 because there's very little torque with low power. At 135 miles an hour, flaps are extended 50%. Power and speed are decreased in the approach pattern, but 120 is maintained throughout the approach. Once full flaps are extended, the landing must be made. There is no choice in the matter. So only extend flaps 100% when you see it's in the bag. Retard the throttle and come in over the fence at 110. Then flare out, making contact at between 95 and 100 miles an hour.
Boy, if I'd known how easy that baby flies on one engine, I'd never bothered.
Well, it's not easy and it's not hard. Just know how to practice. Here, Bill, this will give you some idea what I mean. Too flat an approach on single engine is definitely bad.
It's apt to result in undershooting the field. The high approach can be made by diving down and leveling off short of the field. But the recommended approach has been found to be the easiest as well as the safest.
It's okay to use some power until you actually contact the ground.
Uh-huh.
Hey, one engine's quit.
He's still got another engine.
Well, he made it, but boy.
Come here, I want to show you something.
I think that's Tony Levere. Tony, simulate single engine failure on takeoff. Okay, Milo. I'll cut the right engine. The right engine will quit at 120. Power is reduced and hard left rudder to check yaw. Power increased. Drop tank release button punch to drop the tanks. Right mixture control off. Full feather right propeller. Right throttle off. The other procedures are carried out while level flight is maintained until 140 miles an hour. And now he climbs to a safe altitude. Remember, Bill, this is your first crack at it, so take it easy.
Okay. Side windows closed, hatch secure.
Straighten nose wheel.
Nose wheel straight. Drop tank switch at safe. Selectors on. Ready for single engine practice flight on left engine.
Make sure that you be on the tank with the most fuel.
Switching from front to rear main. Right booster pump off and set to cut throttle.
Go to it.
Right throttle off, hard left rudder to check yaw. Mixture control to idle cutoff. Right propeller feathered up. Right engine is dead. Trimming rudder tab. Closing right press-stone shutter and right oil cooler flap.
How's about setting the controls for unfeathering?
Uh-oh. Feathering switch in normal position. Manual propeller switch in fixed position. Right governor control in low RPM. All set and smooth as silk.
Nice going. Now circle for landing.
.2600 RPM with 20 inches. Tab control set at 0. Gear down at 160. .50% flaps. It's in the bag.
The 38 as a weapon does not have to take a back seat to any plane in the world. It's a man's airplane, effective and versatile. But remember that it is an airplane, and don't lose respect for it. Learn to take advantage of its strong features, both of safety and attack. The skies belong to you.
Gentlemen, this is the Mustang. It can fly... that was the Mustang. Pretty fast, huh? However, there are some nasty rumors floating around about this ship, and we might just as well admit they're true. Some pilots don't like the P51. Here are the pilots. However, our pilots don't seem to agree with these gentlemen. Here's what they have to say.
I peeled off away from that 109 like I was standing still.
And when it comes to blasting enemy pillboxes...
Yes, sir. She's the baby for low-level attack.
Well, I was on top of that supply column before the Nazis knew I was coming. Gentlemen, that was the Mustang. Designed, built, and flown in 180 days. Ordered in 1940 because the British foresaw the day when the deliveries made by the Ju-88s to Coventry would be returned with interest. An escort fighter which could fly farther and faster in protecting our bombers delivering those bundles from Britain. Gentlemen, that was the Mustang. But today, in order to accompany our new bombers deep into enemy territory, our fighters must fly farther still and higher. Out of this need arose... Well, Colonel, there she is, the P-51B.
Looks like the old Mustang, doesn't she?
Yes, much of the construction is exactly the same. But Mr. Dietz, using the same basic design as the P-51A, has built a ship that'll fight from 25,000 feet on up.
That's the new engine, eh?
That's the Rolls-Royce Merlin 61, built by Packard. It's a 12-cylinder job like the Allison and the P-51A.
But it packs a military rating of 1,520 horsepower and a war emergency rating of 1,630 horsepower. And a two-stage supercharger. This two-stage blower and external fuel tanks mean it can serve as a high-altitude escort fighter for long-range bombers, besides doubling as a low-altitude fighter, dive, or low-level bomber. And with 150-gallon ferrying tanks under each wing, your pilots will be hopping the Atlantic pretty soon without too much trouble.
And we're putting an 85-gallon tank in the fuselage, back of the pilot seat.
Now, these tanks, or the bombs, these are dummies, of course, go in these racks on each side, as you know. Without these racks, the plane has 15 miles per hour more top speed.
But this ship is faster than the old model, even with the racks on. And we're swinging a four-bladed prop to absorb the extra power.
It's a Hamilton hydromatic constant speed job with cups.
Now, we're using the same laminar flow airfoil as before. that made the Mustang such a fast ship. And, this is a newly designed aileron that gives the ship an extremely fast rate of roll. We call it the sealed balance type. I have a diagram here that illustrates how this aileron works. Now, the normal aileron looks like this.
When the aileron moves up into the airflow, air leaks through the space between the aileron and the wing. That's where a lot of the force applied to the stick is wasted. But our sealed balance aileron lessens to a great extent the force required, because the part of the airflow that formerly escaped can no longer do so. The cloth connection stops it.
Therefore, this airflow, which formerly escaped, exerts a force down on the airtight cloth, which in turn enables the pilot to force the wing down with much less effort.
You don't have to tell me why that's important in lining up those 450s there on a Messerschmitt or a Focke-Wulf.
We have a pretty insulation on those guns. Let's take a look at them. Sam, give me a hand with these access doors here.
I want you to notice how we laid the guns on the side to eliminate any bulge in the airfoil. We're using a simplified mounting that allows removal in a few seconds.
What about the guns the Jerry's and the Japs are packing? What kind of protection does the pilot have from enemy gunfire?
Well, let's take a look at the sketches, shall we? We'll show you. Here we are.
The P51B is equipped with face-hardened steel armor plating and an armor glass windshield. This affords protection for the pilot from bullets hitting within this area. We've also protected the coolant tank and the nose from frontal attack. In other words, in flight you get these cones of protection from enemy bullets.
Which should be comforting news to the pilot.
Well, personally, I think it's a good idea to get rid of the enemy before he has a chance to try the armor plating.
You've got something there, Major. Arthur, let's stop shooting the breeze and get this ship off the ground.
Okay, Bob. Colonel, if you'll join me in the control tower, we'll have grandstand seats.
Right. See you later, Chilton.
Right, sir.
Bob will give a continuous radio report on everything he does in this plane which might deviate from normal pilot procedure, even if it's scratching his ear in the middle of a loop.
Hello, Mr. Dees.
Oh, Charlie, these are the gentlemen I called you about. Colonel, let's get over to where we can see things. Ah, there's Bob. Now, you notice he gets in the plane from the rear, and flaps are kept down to prevent anyone stepping on them. Now, Bob, before he gets into the cockpit, checks the Zeus buttons on the radio compartment panels. Once inside the cockpit, he gets comfortable, adjusts the rudder pedals, gets his shoulder harness set. Well, they should be ready by now. Charlie, let's give them a call.
Okay, Mr. Dees. Hello, Army 115. This is Mines Tower. The air's all yours, Bob. Nothing expected for the next hour. Over.
Hello, Mines Tower. This is Army 115. Well, here's where I start the monologue. Hope your ears can take it. I've checked the servicing of the ship to have an idea of the amount of load I'm carrying.
Rate of climb can vary as much as 500 feet a minute, depending on the load.
I close the cockpit enclosure by first pulling the left side into position, then lowering the upper portion. And I make sure the enclosure handle is locked in place with a safety latch, and rear hatch and felt molding is checked.
He checks to see that the warning pins in the right sliding track are down.
Pins checked. Starting the regular before starting engine check.
Oh, by the way, if you were going to make an engine run up on the ground, especially pulling more than 40 inches of manifold pressure, be sure that the tail of the P51B is anchored securely, that the flaps are kept up. You see, the weight of the new Rolls-Royce engine has moved the center of gravity forward. As a result, the slipstream from the prop is liable to force the tail up.
During my regular check, I make sure that the emergency boost control is in automatic, as I'm only to use it in case of war emergency for not more than 5 minutes at a time. Making sure supercharger control in automatic and not in low. Coolant and oil switches checked in automatic. Fuel booster pump on normal. Finish check, starting engine. Clear.
The fuel booster pump draws from whatever tank the selector is on. We tried to cut down on the number of things a pilot has to do. That's why the ship has an automatic manifold pressure regulator connected to the throttle. But the pilot will have to be careful under icing conditions, because the automatic regulator will try to compensate until the carburetor is completely iced up. May I have the microphone, please, Colonel? Are you ready, Bob?
She's warmed up, ready for taxi. Here I go. The attitude of this ship makes ground visibility very poor. So S-ing is necessary even more than in most airplanes with a conventional type landing gear. In order to save the brakes, use the steerable tail wheel feature. If I hold the stick at neutral, or slightly aft of neutral, the tail wheel is steerable 6 degrees on each side. All I have to do is move the rudder pedal. The 6-degree steering feature doesn't allow sharp turns. In order to make one, I simply push the stick forward. The tail wheel unlocks and becomes full swiveling. However, excessive throttle or excessive use of brakes with the stick forward should be avoided to prevent nosing over. Making regular cockpit check. If in doubt, use the checklist. Every Army plane's got one. Flaps up. Coolers open. Trim tabs, 7 degrees, right rudder trim. Note that I switched the fuel booster pump to emergency. The pump draws from whichever tank the selector is on. Instruments, okay. Switches on main panel, okay. Checking oxygen gauge. Switches right panel, okay. Gas tanks, full. Running up engine, checking mags. Now, I use no flaps normally for takeoff, but if I were carrying bombs or external tanks, I might use them. So to show the operation, I'll use them this time. The best settings, 20 degrees flaps and 6 degrees tail heavy on the elevators, as the plane will get off more quickly and give a greater feeling of control that way. The manifold pressure can be used as you need it up to 61 inches. The propeller control is fully forward for the maximum RPM of 3,000. Taking off. Keeping the tail on the ground and use of rudder trim, as I said before, counteracts normal torque action on takeoff. A bit of back pressure on the stick has to be used to keep the tail down. Landing gear up. Here come the flaps. Practically no settling when they're raised. Fuel booster pump in normal. The plane feels normal now that it's off the ground. I'm heading upstairs.
Let's get a pair of binoculars so we can see what's going on, Colonel. There's a pair, Major.
Thank you.
$20,000 feet. The supercharger just changed over in a high blower. A jump seems to occur in the engine, then the manifold pressure returns to its original setting. It switches at an altitude of between 20,000 and 20,500 feet. Heading on upstairs. $25,000 feet. I've leveled off.
Hello, Chilton.
Hello?
How is she on directional trim changes when speed and horsepower are varied?
I'll throttle back and give it a whirl. The airplane is stable at all normal loadings. but the directional trim changes at low speeds as horsepower and speed is varied. However, the rudder tab corrects this effectively with only a slight adjustment, and it should be used as necessary. Normally, there is no trouble as the plane is naturally stable.
That means the P51B will remain at any altitude without adjusting the trim tabs.
Less work for the pilot.
Now I'm going to show her stalling characteristics. The stall is comparatively mild and occurs at approximately 95 miles per hour indicated with gear and flaps up. About 3 or 4 miles above this stalling speed, a slight elevator buffet occurs. Plane sinks a distance, then rolls over on one wing. It doesn't whip over as some other planes do and has very little tendency to drop into a spin. The recovery is completely normal. All that has to be done is to release the back pressure on the stick and apply opposite rudder. With the gear and flaps down, the stall would have the same characteristics as before, only it occurs at about 85 miles per hour indicated.
Naturally, with combat tanks or bombs making an extra load, the stalling speeds are higher.
I'll run to an accelerated stall. A heavy buffet occurs around the wing root fillet and the horizontal stabilizer 3 or 4 miles per hour above actual stalling speed, but the plane recovers immediately by releasing pressure on the stick. The accelerated stall has stronger warning characteristics than a normal stall.
Hello, Bob. Show us a couple of dives.
Okay, Colonel. Here she goes. Plane gains speed extremely fast in a dive. Tends to veer slightly to the right and continue in a dive without pulling itself out for quite a long time.
The propeller doesn't overrun during the dive, does it?
Not a bit. I put it at 3,000 RPM and it stayed nailed there. Any other questions, sir?
No, thanks. How about doing a couple of rolls for us?
Here's one to the left. Rate of roll is extremely fast, especially at high speeds.
That's due to the seal balanced aileron. The final result of 14 different designs.
That fast roll really counts, too.
Yes, that means the pilot can disengage the enemy a lot quicker.
We believe the only enemy ship that can approach it for speed of roll is a Focke-Wulf 190.
Here's another dive. In the dive, the pilot doesn't have to maintain excessive forward pressure on the stick. Catch the slight tendency to veer to the right with the trim tab, if in a prolonged dive. Otherwise, the ship is positively stable in the dive. Hello, Arthur. I'm going up to high altitude and put her in a maximum speed dive to show you how fast you'll go before reaching compressibility.
Okay, Bob, let us know when you're up there.
Roger.
Now then, while Bob's climbing, there are some points that might interest you gentlemen. Let's sit down, shall we? Colonel?
Thank you.
As you know, the true speed of a plane at the time compressibility occurs, divided by the speed of sound at that altitude, gives us a figure called the Mach number, so named after the man who discovered the relationship. Let's take an example. We'll say the plane reached compressibility at 560 miles per hour. That's true airspeed, at 10,000 feet altitude. Dividing this speed by 724, the speed of sound at 10,000 feet, we get, and gentlemen, we've done this arithmetic many times before, 0.76, the Mach number. Now that number indicates the speed a plane can dive at any given altitude. The higher the Mach number, the faster the plane can dive without encountering compressibility trouble. We believe the P51B has the highest Mach number of any fighter. Now there's a point I'd like to make to pilots about getting into compressibility, but first a little more dope. The Mach number of any given ship remains the same no matter what the altitude. But the speed of sound decreases at high altitudes. So the higher the altitude, the less speed required to get into compressibility. Let's get back to our problem. Suppose we were at 30,000 feet. Then X, the speed we could go, divided by the decreased speed of sound at that altitude, 680 miles per hour, equals the Mach number, 0.76. Solving, we find that we could go Only 517 miles per hour before getting compressibility. One more thing. The higher the altitude, the faster the true speed for any given indicated speed, and as I said, the lower true speed required to reach compressibility. So here's the point, and it's an important one. The pilot should remember that at high altitudes, he reaches compressibility at much lower indicated speeds than at low altitudes. At any rate, observe the speed limitations posted in the cockpit.
38,000. Are you all set down there?
I guess we're all set. We had enough theory for the moment anyhow. Major, should we let them know we're still down here?
Right. Hello, Bob. We're all set down here. You really gonna wind her up for us?
Just you hold on to your hat, Major.
Okay. Give us your indicated speed and how she acts when you get her into compressibility, will you?
Roger. I'll be down in a minute. $300, $350, $400, $440, compressibility, stick moving fore and aft, slight elevator overbalance, heavy buffeting on tail section, oscillation occurs rapidly. However, control forces on elevators remain unchanged. Plane hunts slightly along horizontal axis, pulling out now. No difficulty, except buffeting continues until a lower speed has been reached.
440 indicated at that height. That's really moving.
Enemy fighters will have a hell of a time trying to keep up with this ship in a dive.
They really would, Colonel.
I'm going to try a couple of spins. I'll do a right spin first. Here she goes. In a right spin, there is a continuous oscillation. A slight rudder buffet is present. Procedure for recovery completely normal. No trouble getting out of the spin.
Probably try one to the left now.
For 3 turns, an oscillation is present as in the right spin. Then the spin becomes stable. Recovery is the same. Full opposite rudder, then stick in neutral. Going into a sustained side slip. Couldn't hold it. I'll do another. The plane will not hold a sustained side slip. The aileron control is insufficient to hold it on a side-slipping angle. The ship automatically tends to straighten out.
However, it will side-slip long enough to avoid enemy fire.
What about prohibitive maneuvers? The usual limitations?
Right, no snap rolls, inverted spins, or outside loops.
Hello, Bob. How about some aerobatics?
Roger. Here's a loop. Here's a climbing roll. At high cruise, this airplane will even do a loop or Immelman from level flight position.
Of course, with the external fuel tanks or bombs installed, acrobatic maneuvers are prohibited. Also, every pilot should be warned not to fly inverted for more than 10 seconds. In that position, the scavenger pump fails to operate and oil pressure drops.
Gonna buzz the field, Colonel. Want you to watch this for speed.
Here he comes.
And watch this.
Like a bat out of hell. Boy, that was beautiful.
Anything else I can show you while I'm up here?
That was beautiful, Bob.
Thanks, Colonel. I'll show you her gliding characteristics. I'll make a glide approach before landing.
Right.
Let's move over to where we can watch them come around. You show your power-off glide first. The ship is designed so it can glide any safe speed down to a margin of about 25% above stalling speed. With the gear and flaps up, the glide is fairly flat. The nose being high makes forward visibility poor. Now, if you'd lower either the landing gear or the flaps or both, you'd greatly steepen the gliding angle and increase the rate of descent.
Hello, Mines Tower. This is Army 115. Request landing instructions. Over.
Hello, Army 115. This is Mines Tower. You clear to land, Bob. Use runway 25. Over.
Roger. Out. Making normal pre-landing cockpit check. Checking that fuel selector in on fullest tanks. Propeller control at 2,500 RPM. This setting gives a margin to apply power in case of a bad landing and helps prevent the engine from over-revving. There's a tendency to do that due to the flat position of the blades and lag of the pitch control mechanism. Mixer control in auto-rich. Oil and coolant radiator scoops in automatic. Lower the landing gear only below 170 indicated by pushing landing gear handle in down position. Make sure it's securely snapped so vibration won't jiggle it up. Adjust power and trim to maintain 150 indicated. When the airplane has been brought into the wind for landing, the flap should be lowered fully. But be sure the indicated is below 165. As soon as I turn into the field, I maintain gliding speed of around 115 with a normal warload.
With a full load, including auxiliary ferrying tanks, the gliding speed is between 125 and 130.
Adjust the trim tab to assist in landing.
Landing.
You can land just as well crosswind. The wide landing gear and the lockable tail wheel make it safe. But as you know, never use more than half flaps. Well, let's go down to the line and talk to Bob. Thank you.
Well, how'd you like her, Colonel?
Nice show, Bob. Mr. Deeks, I think we've got something.
Thank you, sir.
Nice landing, Bob. But tell me, what happens if you make a bad one, if you bounce her in? Do you give her the gun and bring her around again, or do you just ease it in?
Well, if the attempt at landing is badly made so that the wing drops or you get a bad bounce, go around again. But don't slam the throttle open, because if you're too near stalling speed, engine torque will drive you right into the ground. You should ease the power on, get the nose down, and go around again. If at the last moment you decide not to make a landing, ease the throttle open, and when you reach an airspeed of about 110 and an altitude of about 300 feet, raise the flaps by degree, a notch at a time, after raising landing gear.
Tell me, what about engine failure during flight?
Engine failure during flight. Pull the emergency release handle of the cockpit enclosure so you won't be trapped inside in case it jams on landing. Lean forward when you do, because the hatch might clip you on the ear. Drop your external fuel tanks. And if there's time, lower the flaps. But remember, you've got to do it by hand because your hydraulic pressure is gone. Keep your landing gear retracted and land on the belly of the ship. no tea party, but you shouldn't have too much trouble. Oh, one more thing. Get away from the ship as quickly as possible because the cockpit can get a little warm in case a fire starts.
Tell me, how does she behave on scramble takeoffs?
Oh, same as any other fighter. If she isn't warm, the oil has to be diluted enough to ensure proper oil pressure at moderate power. Then as soon as the engine will take the throttle, just taxi out and take off. But apply the throttle slowly and steadily. Sudden application, as in any takeoff, causes the engine to cough and spit. How'd you like me to check you out in it, Major?
What are we waiting for?
Excuse me, Colonel. Gentlemen, that's the Army's improved version of the Mustang. A stronger, longer-range Mustang for high-altitude fighting. And today, thousands more are being made by workers on the production line for you on the fighting line.